Hi all. From that match against Stevenage, also there was another very exciting game, dramatic unfolding anyway, in the game between A.Ethelontis, my good friend Alex, and Amato, who's like 173. Alex is now 200 this year for the first time. And in fact, I just chatted with him very recently, about this idea of examining forcing variations. And he mentioned, that's sort of common sense that you should really definitely check out. The guaranteed, forcing variations, because it could be a forced win. Once you assert that there could be a forced win in your position, of course you don't want to miss out on that. But you need this kind of separate. I like to call it a docking computer, and I didn't actually explain how I arrived at that concept. And in this video, okay, I'm going to hijack his game a bit, just mention also about this docking computer concept. Actually, it's from this game called Elite. I remember one of the first things I really wanted when playing Elite, when getting enough credits in Elite, was to buy a docking computer. So you get to those planets. So that's like your strategic positional play. You get to a planet, but you want to sort of land on it without like damaging your spacecraft. Or I don't know what the issue was actually with landing. But there was some issue, and it was very important to get a docking computer. That was one of the first things that you got, a docking computer. So that's why I think I want to sort of carry on this theme in that previous video on this channel about the importance of examining forcing variations. And I'm going to keep sort of nudging you guys, how good is your docking computer? And the question here is, in this game, as a sort of test, even if the position looks as dry as a bone, which has been in the desert for like hundreds of years, you've got a position like that. Okay, keep your docking computer switched on. So I want you to do that for this game. It's a very, very highly positional game. You probably never even play C4, most of you. So it's highly positional. It's about central control, C4, the English opening. And Alex is a great exponent on it. And he sort of influenced me to play it quite a lot in many club games as well. So G3, we're talking, central control. Forget trying to hack the opponent's king at the moment. If you control the centre, your pieces have greater flexibility in any direction. You can maybe attack on the queen side, the king side. You want to establish control over the central squares. The 4 key central squares, the fianchetto is supported by that pawn. So knight c6, bishop g2, very positional. And you might say dry chess. This isn't romantic era chess. This isn't king's gambits. This isn't going for the king. Just central control again. Reinforcing the grip on d5. So Alex was white. So black's playing a reasonable setup as well, the symmetrical variation. It's all pretty symmetrical at the moment. e3, e6, again very, very symmetrical. Knight g2, knight g7, perfect symmetry. Symmetrical. Now the symmetry is broken slightly, temporarily, knight f4. Black, innovation here, black didn't play knight f5, keeping the symmetry. Black actually castled. And now we deviate. White now plays h4, so finally we've broken the symmetry of the position, and white's playing this h4, which seems, you might argue, is it anti-positional? Because it's not really about the central, fight, it's about the king. Well, often the king's on the right-hand side, on the king side, so you're going to play decentralizing moves to try and get to the king, but you want to try and maintain your control of the centre ideally, because often counter-attacks can come via the centre to sort of refute your attack or get to your king. But here, the position's closed enough, nothing's really happening, the centre isn't open yet, so black actually responds with h6. So maybe, if h5, there's g5 now, whilst before it's g5, there might have been h6, for example, attacking the bishop, and then knight h5, it might be more dangerous. So black was prompted with h6, so at least we've broken the symmetry. The position's not totally like dead symmetrical, boring English opening now. And white now proceeds for a move which is about pawn structure and about centre pawns as well, because in Sicilian defence as black, this is like reverse Sicilian. Often you want to play this as black, with rook b8 and b5, because really you want to trade off a flank pawn for a more central pawn, which sometimes undermines black's control of d4 if you can knock out this pawn, or intensify pressure on b7. So coordinate pressure on the B file. So there's central concerns, there's structural concerns, there's pawns in the centre. But again, it has a bearing on black's central focus. D4 is being challenged, and potentially this knight can also be driven away as well as BC. If this knight is driven away, black's grip on d4 is going to be a bit less. So a3 is a delicate little positional move which you might not consider in your own games. I've described it sometimes as playing like wet lettuce when it hasn't worked for me in like the recent London Classic, but sometimes it does work a treat. In this position, black's bishop is not doing much at the moment on c8, but it's because it's symmetrical. Same with white's bishop. But another reason for this is not just to play b4 with support. You can also just play b3 actually. So in fact, b3 and bishop b2, and a subtlety about this is that if black really thinks this is the major threat, b4, black might be tempted for a5, in which case you get b5 as another sort of weakness, where these two pawns are going to not have anything to do with b5 anymore, because b5 is being weakened. But no, black doesn't play a5. That would be very committable. Black actually responds with rook b8. So we've got a nearly symmetrical English opening, really dry as a bone. Is your docking computer still switched on? That's the question. Something exciting is going to happen in this game. I will tell you that now. Very, very exciting stuff is going to happen in this game, believe it or not. But for the moment, rook b1. Okay, d6. Now Alex finally castles. b6. Okay, b6 possible because the knights are supporting each other. It's not hanging a knight. The bishop could challenge maybe this bishop, exchange off, and if that bishop gets exchanged off, we're left up with some weak light squares maybe later on. b3, and by the same token, if bishop b2 again, exchange off, and black will have weakened dark squares around the king. Black doesn't want to sort of double the pawns here because that will give white some pressure on d6, and maybe this bishop's going to be useful on this diagonal potentially. Also maybe b4 could be handy. That c3 pawn could be useful. Black doesn't want to give up the dark square bishop defender of the king for the double pawn. So bishop b7. Sensible so far. Bishop b2. So we have both bishops eyeing the more sensitive bishops around the king. These are the more sensitive bishops to exchange off because we're talking king safety implications as well as just squares being weakened. So what happened here? Queen d7. Now we have this idea that, weaken the squares around the king, get this bishop exchange. Black doesn't want that. Black commits here to playing e5, which weakens d5 immediately, which justifies the knight actually coming from f4, being moved to f4 in the first place, because now it can jump to d5. So white's gaining something from this. What can we say white's gaining? And white's actually Alex has made a slightly controversial decision here. In that, don't we want a piece on d5? Well, sometimes knight takes, c takes, as we've seen in past videos. Sometimes c4 is useful for a knight. It's vacating c4 as a potential outpost square. But also in this case, we're decentralizing that knight, which means d4, getting control of the all-powerful d4 square is going to be more on the cards here. But after knight e7, d5 is under fire. d4 is not possible. White has to actually concede that he might not be playing d4 here. And Alex makes such a radical concession now, because now after e4, look, d4 is being clamped down by both of those pawns. But what was an alternative here? You might consider knight c3. Now that might be an alternative. But maybe, b5, it's a bit tricky to evaluate this, because this knight, you might actually want it on e2 to support f4 later. It's nice for supporting f4. So it's very, very complex what's going on here beneath the surface of this game. Let's just engine check, actually. What does the engine like e4? Actually, it gives knight c3 and e4 slightly sort of, e4 slightly given slight favoritism now over knight c3. Actually, knight c3 was giving f5, d3, bishop a6. So interesting stuff. But actually, it's giving a slight edge to black after e4. But I'm not sure that's the case. It's a very complicated position. And what we observe here, okay, white has conceded the option for the moment of playing d4, unless he can undermine that c5 pawn maybe, then d4 would be on the cards, and we would have potential impact on this diagonal, and potentially weakening the dark squares later if d4 was carried out. But at the moment, black's got a kind of Maroczy kind of bind on d4, and maybe it's a bit ambitious now, overly ambitious, to play f5. Okay, it's trying to undermine, d5. Of course, EF is not possible without weakening d5. Black's got some pressure on d5. And black might also be playing f4 like a sort of king's engine. And in fact, this bishop could then return to that diagonal. So maybe this is why Alex's next move is very good, I think. Bishop h3, delaying black from ever playing f4 at the moment. The queen unpins, so actually f4 might be on the cards, but it would be inviting bishop e6 check. So d3 and f4 wasn't played here. Now instead, the move king h8 is played here. Now if your docking computer was turned on, you might sniff from some of the variations a tactical vulnerability already from this move king h8. Because actually king h8, imagine if these guys were out of the way, that would be a check. This king is actually on a firing line on h8. So just bear that in mind. The king's on a firing line. So with that in mind, f4 is actually striking an important point which would gain access to the king. And it justifies the knight being on e2 rather than c3. Remember, so that controversial decision not to play knight c3, but leave the knight on e2 and forfeit the idea of d4, because actually f4 was an option anyway to undermine e5. So now Alex's opponent disconnects the rooks, and this is the point in post-mortem Alex's comments. He was pleased that at the moment the opponent was disconnecting his rooks, he was almost like connecting his rooks at the same time, which was sort of amusing. So f takes e5 now, d takes e5. And, this is the point where white has connected rooks. Hi there. Hi there. How you doing? How you doing? Okay, connected rooks. These guys, hey, we've lost connection. What's going on here? These two guys are in the way. Oh, there. So, now, black plays f takes e4. And Alex now gains a tempo to even seize the f file after this move f takes e4, so I'm not even sure this is a great move, f takes e4. Check, and the tempo is seized for the f file, rook f1, queen d8. And now, how's your docking computer here? Hopefully you're checking out bishop takes c8, it's a forcing move. And you might already be checking out other forcing moves. And myself and Jengis were discussing this, but we went far away towards the bar. And we'd finished both our games. I'd won my king's engine quite quickly. Jengis had a draw. And I was saying, hang on, this position is quite interesting with this king over here. What about rook f7, I was saying? Rook f7 just sacking here, because actually I saw something quite interesting here. I wonder if you can spot what I was thinking of in this position. So if I give you 10 seconds, what was I thinking of for a key move for white here? 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, bishop takes e5, and I thought this was crushing. And indeed, it is kind of crushing, actually. Even though in post-mortem we'd rejected it because rook takes g7, we thought e3 was refuting it. Here, white has two checks in a row. I hope you can spot the two checks in a row, which would be completely crushing. If I give you 10 seconds from here. Okay, check, discover check. And then taking his check, and then you can move the queen away. So that isn't a useful defence, knight f5 and e3. But there is a defensive resource available to rook f7, which involves not taking on h3. So this is just a sideline of the game. But actually, queen takes d5. So bishop takes h3. The engine is giving actually what I saw. Bishop takes e5 as crushing for white. Absolutely crushing. So this little tactical vulnerability of the queen eyeing h6 is coming into play. But here, instead of that, queen takes d5, and black will be okay apparently. Or e3, no, queen takes d5 is the better one. Rook takes, and that's going to be about equal. e3 takes, and it's about equal. It's evaluated about equal. So it's good Alex didn't go in for that continuation. So there's no need to sacrifice, take risk. If you're in a better position, often, you don't have to take too much risk and sacrifice pieces. So just taking on c8 is fine. But black made a terrible blunder now. He should have just basically recaptured this bishop. that would be the best thing. Just recapture the bishop, and black should be okay. You know, well, white will be still a lot better actually, or significantly better. 0.29. Rook takes c8. Okay, let's follow an example. D takes, and in fact, black has a very clever resource using the pin on the D pawn here. Apparently, knight c6, so you can get into d4. Maybe king g8 or knight d4. Now knight d4 or knight a5 here, knight d4, and that will block that bishop. So there's no big emergency on the diagonal, especially in this position. Okay, but the opponent, and I hope your docking computers turn on for examining forcing variations now. The opponent played E takes d3. So can you guess it here? The move, clue from earlier. So 10 seconds. Okay, bishop takes e5. So there's an immediate threat of queen takes h6 check using that pin. And if bishop takes g7, bang, check. Another forcing move. I hope you can spot it. 10 seconds, starting from now. Check, yes. Wasn't that hard, that one. That's mate in one, actually. Mate in one test. So this just shows, from a seemingly dry position, it's all of a sudden got severe king safety implications, this position, the way it's being opened up along this diagonal. And we've talked about this diagonal actually in quite a few recent videos as being a major sort of attacking diagonal for the attacking player, because you know often the king is over on the king side and often on g8 or h8. So this bishop and the pins and the related pins is very, very important to consider tactically anyway, because that's a major tactical vulnerability that often statistically exists. You know, where the king is on g8 or h, you know, 8. So Alex just, you know, he took on c8, e3, sorry, e takes d, this blunder, bishop takes e5. So the opponent, I think this is virtually the only move, knight g8. If we look at other alternatives here, say king h7, white could just take, and then check will be devastating. This check either on c2 or b2, because now check. So that's fairly. That this is starting to show that actually knight g8 is virtually the only move, because knight g8 defends the h6 pawn away from, you know, queen h6. Okay, so the now bishop takes g7 was played, king takes, and guess what Alex played here? So very nice move. If I give you 10 seconds, can you guess what white plays here, starting from now? Okay, he played knight f4, and I'm wondering actually, is that absolutely the strongest? Maybe we're checking out queen c3, but knight f4, let's first check this out. It threatens immediately knight e6 check. So if queen takes c8, we would have a devastating check here, and if black doesn't want to give up the queen and goes here, then unfortunately the black king's being dragged on that diagonal for a terminal queen c3 or b2 check. So let's just absolutely check if that was the strongest move and not queen c3 for those into precision engineering. Knight f4 is given as the strongest move. Bishop e6 another strong move. What does it say about queen c3? Would that blow the position? No, it would still be winning because of knight f4. And again, you know, knight e6 is a major threat, and if queen takes c8, we've still got a devastating check, and this is still crushing. So it is actually a crushing position. There are a few ways of winning here. Knight f4, I think, is the clearest. So the opponent took, check, and you know, this is all over anyway. So check, and then queen c3. So actually, the opponent actually resigned after knight f4. Actually, perhaps seeing this. So after bishop takes g7 check, king takes knight f4, end of game. So you saw how the position had the potential here to radically open up, and so the need for checking forcing variations like bishop takes e5 increases. Once the centre gets, you know, opened up, especially, then both kings are sort of more vulnerable if things are passing through the centre. as we saw, you know, that bishop was passing through the centre to the king once the centre had opened up with f4. Okay, let's look at that game again in overview and summary. So a very solid, dry positional start to the game, which you might not ever play yourself. You might not be an English opening player, and you might not be particularly a fan of games video annotated or annotated at all in the symmetrical English, because this takes boredom to the highest level often. But actually the boredom was quickly relieved when the symmetry was taken away with knight f4, then h4 and black playing h6. So we've got a situation where both sides, the king bishops, are defending key squares around the king. Hence black's not that keen to sort of damage white's pawn structure here with bishop takes c3. White's content enough for a double fianchetto, not playing for b4, but just to play on the dark squares. So queen d7, knight ce2. Black's shy about his bishop, doesn't want to lose that bishop. Now white's making a very, very interesting concession here about not playing d4, but instead heading to play f4 and still trying to weaken these dark squares around the king. So knight d5, this amazing idea, c takes d5. So on the surface positioning, you know, you're taking away an outpost square, and there's no knight rerouting to c4 in this particular position. So what is going on here? Well, the pawn structure is being locked, and f4 is going to be a major move for white. So both sides have got, you know, the double fianchetto. But now after bishop h3, it seems that white has the edge here, and being able to support the e4 pawn with the double pawn. You know, normally double pawns you might consider them bad, but here it's playing an important role in shutting out, you know, these pieces. This spearhead pawn on d5 is shutting out the bishop on b7, whilst white's bishop is very useful there in sort of virtually sort of pinning that pawn, otherwise bishop e6. So black sort of played a bad move here tactically, because he's leaving a tactical vulnerability and he's adding fuel to the fire when these dark squares are ripped open now, and we've got, you know, other tactical liabilities creeping in now into the position very subtly. After takes, well, maybe not that subtly now, queen d2, you can start to see, oh dear, what is going on here tactically? From what was a quiet, dry position, all of a sudden the centre is not so blocked. Things are starting to happen, and in fact, very, very quickly now, black is forced to resign after takes. One blunder, one key blunder. E takes d3, and it's all over. Bang! Bishop takes e5. After knight g8, you know, black can resign now after knight f4. It just shows a radical transformation of position, this game. The importance of checking for forcing variations, even if the position is as dry as a bone, you know. So hope you got something from that. Comments or questions on YouTube, and congratulations to my friend Alex. So he's keeping up his win rate on his new ECF rating of 200. That's pretty cool as well. Thanks very much.